What is up, Pitt fans? Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And to avoid talking about our bungled brackets, Abby and I are turning to spring football and some of our impressions of the second full week of practices. The Panthers have been technically in spring ball for 3 weeks, but they were on spring break last week. Back to action this week, I believe participating in their first scrimmage tomorrow afternoon. We're recording this on Friday afternoon. But Abby, I really want to lead off with, something that has kind of been in the back of my mind, I think, really since the offseason, since really the transfer portal stuff started heating up. I think back to the end of December when Pitt lost Kenny Johnson in particular. But I am starting to have some concerns about these wide receivers. I was concerned about them before. News this week that Blue Hicks missed one of their, limited spring practices. And that's just one of your veterans in that room, one of your most productive guys, your most productive guy at that position coming back. And I think it just, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, right? Like, this isn't going to completely derail their season that Blue Hicks wasn't there for a Tuesday practice in March. But the receiver position is one of the spots that I have some really serious questions about. So I was not particularly encouraged, and it didn't seem like Pat Narduzzi was either, to know that one of your veteran guys, a guy that you expect to lead the room, was not going to be there for practice. And that alone is not where my concerns are rooted, but I do think it perked my ears up and it made me start thinking more about this wide receiver room and what I'm concerned about.
Absolutely. I mean, I texted you the moment we got that news because you were not there on Tuesday. And I mean, first of all, I was just shocked in the way that Narduzzi kind of went in on him. And I feel like the way that Narduzzi talked about it spoke volumes about what he's feeling. Like, he just seems frustrated, and obviously it makes sense why he's frustrated with Blue. But you start to wonder, how much does that trickle down to the rest when you know that you've lost your top two receivers from last season, and Blue should be your number one guy, and here he is kind of dropping the ball in a way. And then it's just like, yeah, you have CJ Lee back, but who really knows how much he's going to be able to be productive after his injury. I'm optimistic about him, but he's probably the only player right now that I'm really optimistic about. Bryce Yates in theory has made some good catches and has done good things in his freshman season. But it's counting on a guy who has very limited reps, and it just leaves me wondering why they didn't hit that position harder. Because I just I don't know how you leave last season and see who you have and are like, yep, I'm very confident about these guys, and I don't need anyone else to really add to this. Because it just feels like a risk that you didn't necessarily need. And I know that this Pitt team is very much all about, we want to keep our guys. We want to develop our guys. We saw what they're doing with the safeties. It's very similar. But the way that this team is talking about the safeties group is very different than how they are talking about the wide receivers group. And that's just nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking when, in theory, this should be Mason Heinschel, a decent year for Mason Heinschel. But if he doesn't have guys who are ready at the receiver position, then are guys that he can count on, period. Because he obviously can't count on Blue right now. It just makes you wary. It genuinely makes you wary.
Yeah, I agree with you. They only bring in one guy via the transfer portal, and that's Malik Knight. Someone that we heard from Cade Bell, he's really optimistic about what Knight can bring. A little bit of a bigger body, has some kind of long striding speed, maybe a little bit of a deep threat, but Cade Bell said that he's a potential pro player. That's the ceiling that he sees on him. That's one guy, right? And you lost two of your receivers. It's about 1,500 yards, 99 catches, I believe 12 touchdowns as well. That's just a lot of production to replace with a guy like Bryce Yates, who I'm really high on and I think has talent, but we haven't seen him do it. They've spoken, really highly of Cam Sapp. That's another, redshirt freshman who didn't really do much of consequence last season, if he saw the field at all. Tony Kinsler, kind of the same thing, played some special teams, but, we have not seen him play offense at a really high level yet during his Pitt career, his short Pitt career. I don't want to put a ceiling on him, but just when you are a team in the position that Pitt is in and you are trying to level up from 8 wins to possibly more, and you play in what I would expect to be more of a pass-happy offense, you are just leaning on a lot of young guys. You are leaning on guys who have not necessarily done it at this level of college football before. And I think that's what concerns me. Then on top of, Hicks missing a practice, just kind of reflecting a little bit of a lack of discipline and a lack of focus. And then Narduzzi also pointed to, a fumble from Kinsler in that first practice back from spring break, a little bit of sloppiness from the offense overall. Those are the things that I think perk your ears up and make you start to think a little bit more critically about, okay, who did we bring back on offense? What are they capable of? And are we leaning too much on projection as opposed to proven production? And I understand, it is going to be tough for a school like Pitt to recruit really big name transfer wide receivers. Like they weren't going to land, Nick Marsh, who I think was the top rated transfer portal wide receiver, ended up going to Indiana. Like you understand that some of that stuff is going to be a little bit out of their reach, but at the same time, the reality of the situation is that they lost their two leading receivers. They lost a tight end that was really productive and a few tight ends that caught a lot of passes for them as well. And when you've got a freshman quarterback in there, like you have to constantly be thinking about, hey, how can we support this guy? Because you also lose Desmond Reed as well, like who was a huge threat in the passing game. That is just a lot of talent and a lot of production headed out the door that you just don't really see an obvious replacement for. And that's even if you're high on guys like, Hicks or Yates or even Malik Knight.
And again, I think going back to the things that Narduzzi points out and what stood out about practice, I think speaks to what he's thinking about his team. On Tuesday, he was talking about, just a lot of turnovers and was not happy about it. He specifically calls out Tony Kinsler. He doesn't do that if that's not on top of his mind. He pairs it with the fact that Josh Guerriere got a really great, interception there, which shows that, he's excited about that. But at the same time, I just don't feel like there have been enough moments in the few spring practices we've either gotten to see or hear about where they've been, talking about the actual production and good production of the wide receivers. And it's just, again, it's just nerve-wracking because you want guys who are going to be able to support Mason Heinstoll, and you can rely on young guys with experience like Mason Heinstoll at quarterback and Jakirian Turner at running back, but you don't have that young experience at wide receiver. And it's just, it's a risk that if I was in Pitt shoes, I wouldn't want to take, but this is the reality of the situation now. There's no spring transfer portal window, and this is the group that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of things, we can close this video with something a little bit more positive, because linebacker, that's a spot where Pitt did lose a ton of production. Again, kind of similar in the fact that you lost your two top guys, but for a position group where they brought in two pretty experienced transfer players, two players who I think will be good, their returning depth is kind of what gets me most excited. The linebackers are just a position, despite losing Ryan Manilek and Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles. I think you feel the same way. I kind of have zero concerns about who they've got there, and it kind of starts with Jeremiah Marcelin.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy, and I've said this a handful of times. Sorry, the trash trucks are out, and my dog is not happy about it. Yeah. He's a guy that they were very hot on this time last year and at the beginning of training camp last year. And I'd argue that they're even hotter on him this season. Like the way that he gets brought up in almost every single press conference, and that doesn't happen unless you're really excited about a player. And what I like about him is it's very clear that he has taken on a leadership role. When you have Braylon Lovelace, arguably the leader of the linebackers, not arguably, he is the leader of the linebackers, saying that Jeremiah is just such a good leader. Like he's been teaching me things at times and helping me get better. Like that just is exactly what you want out of a returning linebacker, and exactly what you want out of your Mike specifically. And so when you start with him and then you have Braylon Lovelace back, it's really just fitting that third spot. And I feel like they have so many great options. Pat Narduzzi, Cameron Lindsay had his little fluff up with missing class and everything, but Narduzzi was like, he's back in action and looking great. And then I'm excited about Sanford. I'm excited about DeMarco Ward. Like there's a lot of talent in that room that makes me not really worried. Obviously, I would like to see Marcelin in a game, and I would like to see Sanford and Ward in a game. But I mean, I've seen Lindsay. I thought he did really great in the moments that he was called up to, fill in for Kyle Lewis or Rasheem Biles. And so there's just, while there's less experience per se, especially in the Pitt locker room, the things that we are hearing are very promising, and we've seen it too in flashes at least.
Yeah, and that's before you even get to Jaden Bonsu, who hasn't participated in the spring practices yet. Like, there is a ton of depth there. I think Marcelin, opens up so many things for them. His ability to play the middle, being able to bump Braylon Lovelace out to the outside where he can use his athleticism, his speed, his coverage skills, I think is going to work wonders for this Pitt team. And obviously, you had to slide Braylon Lovelace into the middle last year just because that's where he was needed most. That was the optimal way to fit your best three guys on the field. But it is really exciting to think about what Marcelin can do because of how smart of a player he is, how physical he is at that middle linebacker spot. He is really high on my list of players I am most excited to watch when the season actually gets going, and obviously in the spring game and throughout the rest of fall practices, because I really think there is such a high ceiling for him. And that's a player that I think Pitt is going to be really happy with for a long time. And I think I believe they have maybe 3 more years depending on, maybe he gets a medical red shirt for I forget if he was a redshirt freshman going into last year, but either way, Marcelin is a guy that should be in this defense for a long time and should be really fun to watch.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yep. Yeah, I'm excited to see him out there.
Shifting gears a little bit to close out this video, Abby, as always, this video is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where you can place futures bets on who's going to make the Final Four. Abby, at this point, after day 1, do you still have all of your Final Four intact?
All of my Final Four is intact. I will say that I don't think, or other than one team, the other 3 have not played yet, so that could get a shake up today, but I'm still feeling good about my Final Four.
Okay, and who is in your Final Four? Right now, FanDuel has Michigan, Arizona, Duke, Houston as the favorites to make the Final Four. Florida, Illinois, Iowa State, and UConn following close behind. Any of those guys sliding into your Final Four? Because I know you said that you had one kind of odd team, one long shot in there as well.
Yeah, so I only actually have one seed going in, and it is Arizona, the Wildcats. Okay. I think they've been very consistent this season, and I just think they're poised to really – it's not like they've been marred by injuries. They're playing some of their best basketball right now. I think they have a decent path to the final. So they're one. And then I've got 2 twos in there. I think Iowa State has been really competitive alongside Arizona in the Big 12. I think the Big 12 is just absolutely a gauntlet this year, which, makes sense with my 3rd pick, which is Houston, number 2 Houston. So I think the Big 12 has just been phenomenal this year. I've always been high on Houston almost every single year. I think they come in and show up. And then, Iowa State just, I think back to their upset at the time over Purdue of just really setting the tone for what they can do and what they could do early. My 4th pick is the long shot here, but I have 5th seeded St. John's in that spot, which people might be like, Abby, what the hell are you talking about? But I think they've been playing really, really, really well in these last couple of games, whether it was in the Big East tournament or even just in the games leading up to the Big East tournament. And I feel like they could pull off some upsets, including over Duke, who I don't think played very well in their first game.
No.
And I actually have St. John's knocking Duke out in the Sweet 16, and it's a long shot. But as I said, Stephen, before the show, I know that a couple people in my family bracket were also going to pick the same winner that I did. So I needed to throw some curveball in there. And I just thought St. John's could do it.
I think St. John's can do it too. Yeah, you said people might think you're crazy for picking St. John's, but I don't think it is nearly as far-fetched, and I don't think you'll get nearly as much pushback after anyone watched that Duke-Siena game on Thursday afternoon. Mine does not reflect nearly as much faith in the Big 12. I do have Houston in there. I do have them beating Vanderbilt in the Elite Eight. I do think that Florida ends up getting knocked out. I think my original prediction had a bunch of 1 seeds in there. I thought it was going to be super chalky, but got cold feet at the last minute. I do have Duke in there. I just thought they were, the best team all season, and I think that John Shire is a really improved coach, so I thought that they were going to make it that far at the very least. I have Arizona getting knocked out in I believe the Sweet 16. I think I have Arkansas taking them down and then making a run all the way to the Final Four. That's kind of my long shot in a pretty, what I expect to be a chaotic bracket out there in the West region, I think that is. Mm-hmm. And then I round it out with Michigan. And I think we end up getting a Michigan-Duke final. I think that's what this season has been gearing up towards. So those are my predictions. You've seen Abby's. You've heard Abby's. Not a whole lot of – I don't know if there was necessarily a ton of logic behind mine. I was just trying to go with the flow a little bit more than I have in seasons past. But that's all we've got for this video. Thank you all for tuning in to another edition of the PG Pitt Show brought to you by FanDuel. Like this video, subscribe to the page, and make sure that you follow all of our written work at post-gazette.com. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.